Understanding the system, meaning he wouldn't understand the system?
Well, you know, Tim, it's interesting because, you know, in 2006, you ran on the promise that you would not support earmarks. Yet when you got into Congress, in fact, that's what you did.
You're mistaking that again.
What's different about your promise today? What's different about your promise today, Tim?
You're not reporting it accurately. I said I would never be blackmailed into voting for an earmark in order to get one of my projects.
I don't know what being blackmailed means. Would you explain what blackmailed means in this context?
It says we will not support your earmark, such as the runway widening project.
Or the lobsters in Maine.
Where was that at?
In Maine.
No, where was it in the bill? What bill?
It was in an omnibus bill that was part of that earmark distribution.
Well, I look forward to you bringing that out.
I will.
But the issue is, as I held up, and I think Sitpat pointed out, that on the runway extension and widening project in Battle Creek, in the transportation budget with 6,000 earmarks, the bridge to nowhere, and all of the rest, plus that project that I had requested after the request of our local district, it stayed all the way through, and Wahlberg didn't vote for that transportation budget.
That's right.
We were able to get the project, but we weren't blackmailed into voting for pork.
Tim, what I hear you say is you a very convoluted way has justified $35 million worth of earmarks when you were in Congress, and I think that's unconscionable.
Mr. Rennie, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm against pork barrel spending earmarks where you have the bridges to nowhere, where you hide things in appropriation bills. If you have something that's fully vetted, that the eyes of the world see, and it's voted up or down, that's fine by me. And I'll tell you another thing. As the only veteran on the stage can attest to, if it wasn't for earmarks, because our congressmen and women, for the life of me, I don't understand why, because maybe they're afraid to take responsibility for war, refuse to declare war any longer. So instead of declaring war on Iraq or Afghanistan, we have resolutions saying, okay, you can do it, Mr. President. And by doing that, we don't have the procurement system that the Pentagon needs to go forward on a war footing. Rather, they do business as usual. And because of that, I was riding into Fallujah basically in the back of a pickup truck, a Humvee that was not up-armored, that was open air. Because of earmarks, we got hardened up Humvees. The MRAP eventually came around. The body armor that we had, all are earmarks. So when you're talking about oaths that you take to be a congressman or woman, one of the oaths is to raise and put procurement towards the military.
And part of the system is just dealing with the pork barrel projects, is you just have to live with those to get the good ones?
No, you have to work within the process to try to do a unilateral surrender of Democrats and Republicans and work towards getting rid of it by law, saying we're just not going to do it any longer. And we're going to get back to what our constitutional understanding of declaring war is and what we have to do as far as appropriations and what's appropriate and not appropriate, instead of having congressmen or women saying, hey, look what I did for the district, isn't that great? No, it's not great, because we should be doing it, you know, for everybody throughout this country. No part of this country should be more favored than other or more equal than others.
Let's get to a couple more.
I think, just quickly, to that point, you brought up a good point, Brian. I'm glad that I offered earmarks for MRAP vehicles, V-bottom hulls, armor. I'm glad I offered earmark for Peckham Industries that supplied cold weather gear for you and your comrades over there. I'm glad I supported the surge and those type of things, and those are appropriate. But we have to be very cautious, and I think that's why many of us have supported a moratorium on earmarks now, because we've got to get to the bottom of this, and that starts with bringing some sense of security back to our taxpayers, that this unseemly, ugly approach that's taken place by a lot of members of Congress is ended, and we come around to a system that is open.
Speaking of federal expenses, I know, of course, you all support small government, and you also opposed the federal bailout of the banks a couple of years ago. What about the bailout of GM and Chrysler? Was that a bad idea?
Mr. Rooney?
I can start. You know, it's easy to say in retrospect it was a bad idea. I would have done it differently, and the way I would have done it, understanding bankruptcy laws and those sorts of things, instead of completely doing an end run around what our institutional understanding on bankruptcy laws is, we fixed the system. And what we should have done is say to GM and Chrysler that we will be a backstop for you at the back end of this bankruptcy that you're about to go through. So we won't allow a federal judge or a judge to liquidate you. We'll guarantee that you're still going to be around. But to guarantee it on the front end was a bad idea. And I can tell you, you know, Congressman Wahlberg...
It saved jobs in the district, didn't it?
we could have saved more jobs if we would have done it the way I thought about it. Congressman Wahlberg was against the TARP, and appropriately so. However, he did sign a letter saying after the auto bailout vote that he missed didn't pass the Senate, it went to President Bush, and he signed a letter along with every other congressman and woman in Michigan saying, use TARP funds to bail out the auto industry. Well, they ended up doing that. I'm not so sure it was constitutional because TARP was specifically for Wall Street, not for GM and Chrysler. And when you monkey with the system like our president did and a lot of congressmen and women, you end up getting this horse-buy committee that we ended up with GM and Chrysler. Now, they're becoming competitive again, but they would have been even better than what we have now. I believe 61% we still own of GM. I'm very fearful in the future that when we do finally do a public offering for that stock, who's going to feel confident that, yeah, I'm going to buy GM stock, and if the company does go south again, I'm going to be treated equally in what the law says I'm going to be treated.
Was that some of that true, Mr. Wahlberg? And did you, looking back, was it a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, I think that the proof is in the pudding. That what ultimately happened was we took any incentive away from General Motors and Chrysler to do all that was necessary to put themselves in sound footing for the rest of their life. We knew, and I made that very clear, I knew that it would ultimately come to a bankruptcy. The question was, is it going to be a public-run bankruptcy or a private bankruptcy? You only have to look at Delta Airlines or Ford Motor Company that did the restructuring that was necessary or went through a private sector bankruptcy that left everything on the table. We took some things off the table, or the government, in owning the auto industry, took things off the table that I think would have produced more jobs in the future, would have kept more jobs in the present, and would have set the leadership of GM and Chrysler up to be able to run a company that was based on sound principles and not past excessive legacy costs.
Well, plain and simple, it was a UAW payoff for the union support of the Obama administration. I believe that what we have to do is, in the capitalist system, we have to be prepared for failure. That's what the capitalist system is all about. We have opportunities for success. My hero, for example, Henry Ford, he failed twice before Ford Motor Company actually became viable. That's what we have to go back to. We have to say to all those companies across the board, not selected companies, not those that have special pleading in terms of union representation that spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to get their candidate elected. We have to say across the board, yeah, you have opportunity to prosper in this country, but if you don't succeed, the government's not going to come out and bail you out. So I differ from both of these gentlemen. I think and I believe that we should have let General Motors go through the normal bankruptcy proceeding. We would still
end up... cost you a lot of jobs, a lot of people, thousands of jobs in this district?
It would have cost a lot of UAW jobs, but what it would have done, it was actually level or reduce the obligation that General Motors, for example, had in terms of its employment portfolio, and therefore would have kept that country or that company viable. And we would, as time worked itself out, we would have had more jobs. It would have been, yes, a very short-term problem, but in the longer term, General Motors would have come back. Now we're looking at a system where we have to publicly divest ourselves, and Brian is right. When we have now a company that has failed to show that failure is a result of the UAW labor burden, we have